Lewis Hamilton confirms his comeback to Mercedes for the 2026 season. Will he be the #1 driver or take a supporting role? Will he team up with George Russell again? How much will his contract be worth? If you want to find out the answers to these questions, make sure to watch until the end of the video. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. In an earth-shattering twist that has ripped through every inch of the Formula One universe like a lightning bolt, Lewis Hamilton is returning to Mercedes for the 2026 season, an unimaginable comeback that nobody dared to predict but now absolutely everyone is obsessed with. The man who defined an era, the 7-time world champion whose name is etched in the DNA of the Silver Arrows, has chosen to reunite with the very team that forged his modern legacy, elevated him to untouchable greatness, and gave him the throne upon which he built an empire. After a controversial switch to Ferrari that shook the sport to its core just 2 years ago, Hamilton is stepping back into the arena with a team where he felt most empowered, most understood, and most alive. The entire saga has unfolded like a cinematic masterpiece, driven by secrecy, emotion, betrayal, reflection, and ultimately redemption. What appeared to be a fairy tale transition to Ferrari had all the makings of a generational moment. The allure of red, the pull of history, the dream of following in the tire tracks of legends like Schumacher, Ascari, and Lauda. Hamilton didn't just join a team, he dove headfirst into myth, daring to chase the ghosts of greatness and sculpt a new chapter under the blazing Italian sun. It was romantic. It was bold. It was poetic. But poetry, as Hamilton soon discovered, doesn't always win races. Beneath the shimmering facade of passion and legacy, he encountered turbulence. Repeated reliability issues, strategic uncertainty, communication breakdowns, and above all, a cultural disconnect that left him isolated in the very temple he had hoped to conquer. Ferrari wanted Hamilton the symbol, but couldn't fully integrate Hamilton the visionary. His relentless pursuit of perfection clashed with a system entrenched in tradition. His voice, sharp with insight and urgency, was too often diluted in bureaucratic noise. Despite moments of brilliance, impossible drives in chaotic conditions, flashes of pure class that reminded the world who he was, Hamilton began to feel trapped. He wasn't just chasing victory. He was trying to reclaim control. And as each weekend passed, the reality became clearer. He had wandered away from the place where he once thrived, from the team that had understood the essence of who he was. Meanwhile, Mercedes, quietly, patiently, watched. The outfit that had once been an unstoppable juggernaut had struggled to regain direction after Hamilton's departure. Though talented drivers filled his seat, none commanded the same gravitational pull, the same internal resonance. Toto Wolff, ever the architect of futures, knew the door was never truly closed. Discussions began, not out of desperation, but out of mutual recognition. A shared understanding that something was left unsaid, a chapter left unfinished. The bond between Wolff and Hamilton, forged through championships, controversy, heartbreak, and history, still burned quietly behind the curtain. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Hamilton didn't jump at the offer. He pondered. He weighed every aspect. Not because of doubt, but because of gravity. This wasn't about coming back. This was about completing something bigger than himself. He demanded involvement. He wanted to help shape the new era, not just race in it. From the technical side to the human side, he asked for clarity, commitment, and creativity. He wasn't looking for a contract. He was looking for purpose. Mercedes gave him everything he asked for, and more. They didn't just want him back, they needed him. The final handshake didn't come in a press room or a boardroom. It happened in silence, with conviction, with a promise to rewrite destiny. When the news broke, the F1 world didn't just react, it exploded. It wasn't just headlines. It was emotion. Tributes poured in. Rivals reacted with stunned silence. Ferrari's PR team scrambled. Supporters around the globe lit up timelines, racetracks, and forums with everything from joy to heartbreak to disbelief. Some called it betrayal. Others called it brilliance. But no one was indifferent. Because Hamilton isn't just a driver, he's a movement. And this move reignited the flame of a legend that never truly dimmed. The grid now braces for a renaissance. Hamilton's return to Brackley is not a retreat, it's a resurgence. He's coming back not to relive the past, but to shape the future. With new regulations on the horizon, fresh rivalries brewing, and a championship window that remains cracked open, Hamilton's mission is clear: rise once more. No longer driven by proving the doubters wrong, he's now focused on proving something to himself. That the magic isn't over. That the story still has pages left. That greatness, true greatness, is defined not by how high you climb, but by how many times you return, stronger than ever, when the world thinks you're finished. Every session will carry weight. Every lap will echo with unfinished ambition. Every podium will feel like a reckoning. This isn't just a comeback, it's a thunderous declaration. Hamilton isn't racing for nostalgia. He's charging forward with intent, with defiance, with power. The paddock knows it. His competitors feel it. And the fans? They're already counting the days. Because when Lewis Hamilton straps back into that silver machine, he won't just be chasing victory, he'll be chasing something eternal. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Toto Wolff was standing at a crossroads few team principals ever face. One paved not with clear answers, but with uncomfortable truths. Behind the polished doors of the Mercedes motorhome, the mood had shifted from cautious optimism to quiet alarm. What had once been a bold long-term strategy now felt like a dangerous gamble unraveling in real time. Andrea Kimi Antonelli, the teenage sensation handpicked to lead the next generation of Mercedes greatness, was no longer the promise everyone had hoped for. He was becoming the warning sign. The buzz around Antonelli had reached fever pitch before he ever set foot on a Formula One grid. Billed as the prodigy who would carry the legacy of champions before him, he arrived with expectations taller than the grandstands. But each passing Grand Prix chipped away at that myth. He wasn't just struggling, he was unraveling under the brutal spotlight of elite competition. His racecraft looked raw, unpolished. His tire preservation was inconsistent. His decision-making in key moments swung wildly between hesitation and recklessness. What's worse, his post-race debriefs were more confusion than clarity, offering engineers more questions than solutions. Sponsors, once thrilled to attach their name to the next generational talent, started expressing concern in hushed tones. Race engineers, quietly but increasingly, voiced frustrations about the disconnect between car performance and driver execution. Data analysts began to see disturbing patterns: lack of adaptability, poor race simulations, erratic starts, and mounting mechanical DNFs triggered by rookie mistakes. And above it all stood Toto, watching his hand-picked successor falter, knowing the clock was ticking louder with every forgettable finish. It was a brutal realization, but one he could no longer ignore. Mercedes wasn't just falling short, they were bleeding potential. Every race Antonelli spent at the back of the field was another weekend wasted. Development was stalling. Morale was slipping. The trust that held the organization together was thinning. The car was better than the results suggested, and the driver was no longer the future. And so, Toto made a decision so heavy it nearly broke him. Antonelli had to go. There would be no dramatic press conference, no farewell parade. Just silence and internal briefings. The focus shifted immediately, not just to filling the seat, but to finding the soul Mercedes had lost. The mission wasn't to salvage a season. It was to find someone who could reignite the fire that once made Mercedes the most feared force on the grid. They didn't need raw speed. They needed command, consistency, gravitas. A figure who could carry the burden and the badge with equal force. And only one man came to mind. Not because of history. Not because of nostalgia. Because he was still the standard. Lewis Hamilton. The very name still echoed through the halls of Brackley like thunder. The man who had redefined Mercedes, transformed it from contender to legend, who had fought and won in silver for nearly a decade. He was now clad in Ferrari red, the supposed final chapter of his iconic career. But deep down, Toto knew, Lewis hadn't closed the book. Not really. There was still fire in his eyes. Still something unresolved. The moment their eyes met again, casually, almost by accident, during the summer break, everything changed. It was just a short exchange near the motorhomes, nothing that would grab attention. But in those few minutes, the tone shifted. There was warmth, familiarity, but also something unspoken, a mutual recognition that they were both not quite finished with each other. That brief interaction unlocked a floodgate. It wasn't long before they began speaking regularly, always behind closed doors, always with discretion. There were no press leaks, no paparazzi catching hints of their plans. Just two minds reconnecting, peeling back layers of past glory and present uncertainty. The conversations were layered, part memory, part analysis, part vision. And none of it felt forced. There were no managers present, no legal advisors drafting preliminary outlines. It was purer than that. More powerful. Toto didn't offer promises. Lewis didn't ask for guarantees. Instead, they talked about possibility. About building, not just returning. About leadership, not just pace. About repairing something fractured, not out of regret, but because it still mattered. Hamilton had learned much at Ferrari. The culture, the passion, the pressure. But he had also learned limits, how tradition can suffocate innovation, how romanticism can obscure direction. He had found podiums, even the occasional win, but the machine around him didn't match the machine inside him. And Mercedes, despite recent struggles, still had that ruthless DNA, that surgical hunger. And in Toto, Lewis saw the one figure who had never stopped believing in him, not when the critics grew louder, not when the title slipped away, not even when he walked away. The possibility of return stopped being theoretical. It became real. Because the need wasn't just strategic, it was emotional. Mercedes didn't require a savior. They needed an anchor. A force of nature to recenter the storm. And for Lewis, the temptation wasn't just legacy polishing. It was redemption. Not because he had failed, but because he had unfinished work. There was still a statement left to make. And Mercedes was the only team willing to let him make it, on his own terms. The two men, forged in victory and hardened in heartbreak, began crafting something quietly, methodically. A new plan. A new mission. A possible final act that could rewrite how this era is remembered. Not with a whimper, but with one last furious charge. Nobody outside their inner circle knows what was said in those private rooms. But the energy around them has changed. The paddock feels it. The other team bosses feel it. Even the Ferrari engineers feel it. Something is shifting. Something is stirring. Toto Wolff, pragmatic as ever, doesn't chase ghosts. And Lewis Hamilton, for all his flair, doesn't waste time on illusions. They see the same thing. A window. A challenge. A legacy that demands a final, definitive chapter. And maybe, just maybe, that chapter starts now. It wasn't business. It wasn't strategy. It was deeper. In the quiet hours of a chilly Brackley evening, far removed from the glare of the paddock and the cameras that never blink, two men sat face to face, not as principal and driver, but as souls tied by a history soaked in triumph, heartbreak, and something far more powerful than any trophy: trust. The setting was intimate, cloaked in the dim glow of nostalgia. A hidden room, walls lined with weathered snapshots of glory years, champagne-soaked podiums, and unforgettable moments they had carved into the sports mythology together. No entourage, no PR handlers. Just Lewis Hamilton and Toto Wolff, alone, the air thick with memory. Toto didn't arrive armed with numbers or analytics. There were no slides, no charts, no contractual fine print. What he brought to the table was something infinitely rarer: truth. His voice didn't rise, but it struck with precision. He leaned in, locked eyes with Lewis, and offered something no team principal ever had the courage to say out loud: "You've never belonged anywhere else like you do here. This place lost its heart when you walked out of that garage. You're not just part of the story, you are the story. We didn't just miss your talent. We missed you. This isn't about performance. This is about coming home." And Hamilton said nothing. Not a word. He didn't have to. He sat still, letting the moment breathe. In his hand, a half-finished glass of red. In his mind, 1,000 unspoken thoughts. His gaze wandered, not to Wolff, but to the black-and-white photograph just above Toto's shoulder, capturing the moment they clinched their 6th title together. The corners of his mouth twitched, not a smile, but a flicker of something deeper. He didn't need to speak. Because some things aren't answered in words. They're answered in silence. And in that silence, everything was remembered. The post-race calls after disaster. The private debriefs after injustice. The arm on his shoulder after Abu Dhabi. Mercedes hadn't just offered Hamilton support during 2021's darkest chapter. They'd stood beside him when the world tilted. Not for PR. Not for optics. But because they believed. Because they knew what he carried on and off the track. And that kind of loyalty? It doesn't fade. It anchors itself in your bones. Ferrari had its allure, the romance, the prestige. But when the illusion wore off, all that remained was confusion. Internal disarray. A system he couldn't fix. A culture that wouldn't bend. The red dream had begun to crack. And as Mercedes began to rebuild, not out of desperation but out of conviction, the call became louder. Not with words, but with meaning. He felt it. Not as a strategic move, but as a calling. 2 weeks passed. No leaks. No whispers. No sightings on social media. Just silence. A silence loaded with anticipation. And then, Monaco. The cradle of secrecy. High above the marina, shielded from cameras and the circus below, negotiations unfolded in a fortified villa. Wolff didn't wear logos. His arrival was unannounced, cloaked in confidentiality. And there, inside that luxurious seclusion, they met again. But this time, the wine glasses were joined by contracts. This wasn't about paychecks. Hamilton had more wealth than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. What he demanded wasn't cash, it was clarity. It was about dignity. About closing a chapter properly. About shaping his final act with purpose, not chaos. Respect was the currency, not bonuses. He didn't want another season. He wanted something lasting. Something meaningful. And Toto delivered. Not just the reinstatement of the abandoned 2025 agreement, but a powerful extension, one that reached through 2027, with a door open for 2028 should the fire still burn and the body still answer the call. This wasn't a short-term patch. This was a long-term vision. A belief that Lewis Hamilton, at this stage in his career, could still redefine what greatness looks like. Not just for himself, but for the sport. Within the paperwork lay provisions never offered before. Not perks. Not benefits. Responsibilities. Influence. A structured pathway into a senior advisory role after his final race. Direct input into the team's social mission. Authority to mentor and personally guide his successor. Not just another helmet in the line of legends, but a builder of legacy. A man whose exit would not be a goodbye, but a transition into something even larger. What was forged in that villa was not just a comeback. It was a resurgence. A fusion of past and future. A resurrection of a dynasty that had lost its rhythm. The paddock hasn't felt it yet. But it will. And when Hamilton pulls on that silver suit again, when the black visor drops and the engine screams in 2026, the sound won't just be horsepower. It'll be history roaring back to life. Because some returns aren't comebacks. They're revolutions in disguise. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement of power, a masterstroke of influence crafted with precision, ambition, and legacy in mind. Mercedes didn't just invite Lewis Hamilton back to race. They offered him something far more intoxicating, the ability to sculpt his own legend, from the inside out. It wasn't about laps or podiums. It was about authorship, direction, control over the story that would carry his name long after the final checkered flag. This wasn't a simple return to a former seat. It was an evolution. Mercedes constructed an intricate package that extended beyond racing, a proposal designed to make Lewis not just the face of the team, but its voice, its architect, its heartbeat. They granted him complete creative freedom to shape how Mercedes would use his image, his narrative, and his mission across every platform imaginable. Documentaries, campaigns, philanthropic initiatives. He would decide what they looked like, how they moved, and who they reached. It was legacy in his hands, without filters. But the vision expanded even further. Embedded within the proposal was a groundbreaking ambassador initiative, one built entirely around Lewis's passion for representation. Not a token gesture. A full-fledged platform under his control, aimed at discovering, mentoring, and empowering young racers from underserved backgrounds. From designing the programs to choosing the mentors, every aspect would reflect his values, his fire, his blueprint for what the next generation of F1 should look like. It was grassroots power with global backing. The competitive side wasn't ignored, it was reimagined. Mercedes didn't offer him just a car. They promised an elite, dedicated performance unit engineered exclusively around his feedback. Analysts, engineers, strategists, all handpicked to study every nuance of his driving and translate it into speed. No compromises. No shared resources. Every development, every tweak, Every simulation would orbit around his instincts. It was customization turned into competition, the machinery of dominance fine-tuned to a single man's rhythm. But what shattered the calm was the structural shift. Toto Wolff didn't dance around it. There would be no dual leadership. No diplomatic equality between drivers. Lewis would return as the nucleus. The hierarchy would be reset. George Russell, who had endured the transition years, weathered the turbulence, and clawed for respect, would be repositioned, not removed, but clearly secondary. The system would revolve around Hamilton, and everyone would feel that gravity. The reaction from Russell was volcanic. After years spent carving his own name, shedding comparisons, and stepping into his own spotlight, the news hit like a betrayal. According to someone inside the inner sanctum, George's fury detonated the moment the decision was laid bare during a strategy session. He didn't argue, he erupted. Left the room in silence, leaving only tension behind. But the storm didn't end there. Later that day, George burst into the Mercedes motorhome. No decorum. No hesitation. The tension had reached ignition. "I've earned this," he snapped, eyes burning, voice slicing through the air. "You can't ask me to fade into the background. I fought too hard for that." The silence that followed was suffocating. And then came Toto's reply, measured, steady, and resolute. "This isn't about status," he said. "It's about constructing a force capable of domination. And for that, we need Lewis at the front." Russell wasn't satisfied. Couldn't be. His identity had been forged in Hamilton's absence. His belief in himself wasn't fragile. It was iron, built on sweat and setbacks. "So what happens to me?" he pressed. "Do I become the fallback? The insurance policy?" Toto, unwavering, responded, "You're not a safety net. You're a weapon. But right now, we need the sword that's already tasted blood." The days that followed were electric with discomfort. Meetings became fragmented. The garage buzzed with speculation and side eyes. Engineers whispered. Team morale shifted. Even Hamilton, aware of the emotional fallout, moved cautiously, knowing that every step he took back into Brackley's core came with echoes of resentment, confusion, and quiet admiration. Some within the organization applauded the ruthlessness, believing championship dynasties require bold, sometimes brutal decisions. Others feared the emotional cost. Could unity survive hierarchy? Could a team thrive when one of its brightest talents felt eclipsed once again? The outside world knew nothing of the intensity pulsing beneath the surface. Social media celebrated Hamilton's potential return with nostalgia and excitement. Fans imagined glory, redemption, history. But behind the scenes, in the heart of the beast, things were anything but simple. There was no celebration, only recalibration. No applause, just recalculated loyalty. This was not the start of a comeback. It was a shift in the tectonic plates of Formula One. A recalibration of power. A statement that echoed through every corner of the paddock. Hamilton wasn't returning for nostalgia. He was returning to reclaim control, redefine direction, and reassert dominance. And for George Russell, the message was crystal clear: greatness makes space for no one. It demands it. And now, he had a decision to make: adapt, resist, or walk away from the empire he helped hold together. The throne had been offered. The crown was being polished. And there was only room for one king at the center of Mercedes' next era. Russell, while technically still bound by his Mercedes agreement, had already begun detaching emotionally. The atmosphere had shifted. Conversations once filled with long-term vision and collaborative excitement had turned into brief updates and surface-level interactions. The warmth had cooled. The glances had become more formal. He felt the drift before it was ever verbalized. It was as if the future plans no longer had his name etched in them. He wasn't officially out, but he wasn't at the center anymore either. And he knew it. With that realization came movement. Not loud, not obvious, but subtle. He began probing. Quietly, delicately. There were confidential inquiries through intermediaries. One reached Williams, a place that once represented hope and struggle, now possibly offering maturity and leadership. Another contact brushed up against the Aston Martin camp, where ambition and luxury collided. Though no formal conversations had occurred, and no headlines had been written, the whispers moved faster than the cars he raced. In the paddock, silence often says the most. Yet while George was mapping out alternatives, Mercedes had already locked its sights on a very different outcome. They weren't just tweaking for the future, they were orchestrating a full-scale overhaul. This wasn't a pivot. It was a resurrection. They weren't building for survival, they were engineering supremacy. The upcoming 2026 shift in regulations offered a blank canvas, and Mercedes intended to paint it in silver dominance. They didn't need potential. They needed pedigree. Someone who had walked through fire and emerged sharper. Someone who had felt the highs of glory and the sting of injustice, and was still hungry. There was only one candidate who could ignite that kind of revolution. And he was ready. Lewis Hamilton didn't need convincing. He needed purpose. He needed mission. He needed to feel it. And this was it. A chance to finish what was abruptly paused. A return not just to a team, but to an idea, an identity. He saw the opportunity not as a comeback, but as a continuation. And Mercedes offered him the one thing no other team could, the keys to the rebirth of a dynasty. No politics. No babysitting. Just full commitment. The agreement was finalized in complete secrecy. No press leaks. No speculation. No breadcrumbs for the media to follow. It happened deep within the heart of Stuttgart, inside a windowless room, guarded by layers of confidentiality. Only top-ranking executives and Toto Wolff's innermost circle were allowed in. No photographers. No executives from marketing. No ceremonial gestures. Just reality, stripped bare and boiling with intensity. Lewis arrived without pretense. No tailored outfit. No entourage. Just a hoodie with understated lettering, back home. The message didn't need translation. It wasn't fashion, it was a statement. He reviewed the final details, nodded, and signed. The pen moved slowly, deliberately, like someone etching a promise rather than just authorizing a deal. Once complete, he stood, locked eyes with each person in the room, and extended his gratitude, not just for welcoming him back, but for believing the job was still unfinished. Then came the moment that echoed beyond the signatures. Hamilton turned to Wolff. No words. Just movement. He stepped forward and embraced him, tight, unbroken, and wordless. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't closure. It was ignition. A reigniting of purpose between two men who had built, bled, and battled together. The silence between them said more than any media quote ever could. They weren't doing this for optics. They were doing it to finish what history had interrupted. What they were building couldn't be captured in spreadsheets or race simulations. It wasn't just a strategic masterstroke, it was a spiritual alignment. Toto wasn't just signing a champion. He was reclaiming the soul of the team. Hamilton wasn't chasing trophies. He was seeking completion. And Mercedes wasn't hiring a driver. They were restoring their heartbeat. This wasn't nostalgia. This was reinvention. They didn't talk about revenge. They didn't mention Abu Dhabi. The past wasn't the fuel, it was the foundation. What came next would be forged in silence, in sweat, in circuits, and in absolute defiance of every voice that had said they were finished. Russell, watching from the edges, may have sensed it all but heard nothing concrete. The pieces were moving, but the final picture hadn't been shown. He still had his seat, but the temperature around him had dropped. The team that once saw him as the heir now had its king returning. And in Formula One, dynasties don't make room, they reclaim space. Hamilton wasn't back for comfort. He wasn't chasing applause. He came for war. A silent one. A precise one. And Mercedes, once shaken, now stood sharpened. The alliance was reborn. And somewhere, far from the cameras, the next era of destruction was already being written. Quietly, fiercely, relentlessly. Lewis Hamilton isn't tiptoeing back into Formula One. He's storming toward it with laser focus and a hunger that borders on obsession. Every movement he makes is intentional. Every decision is loaded with purpose. This isn't the twilight chapter of a fading star. It's the prelude to an uprising written by a man who refuses to be remembered for anything less than domination. At the Mercedes HQ in Brackley, the air is thick with anticipation. He's already spent hours immersed in the simulator, surrounded by engineers who don't just understand his style. They remember every twitch of the steering wheel, every gear shift, every ounce of feedback he ever gave. They worked with him in victory, bled with him in defeat, and now, they're preparing for the reckoning. Hamilton doesn't walk through those factory doors like a guest. He walks like a general, returning to the front line. His eyes don't scan the room, they target. Every engineer knows when he arrives. His presence electrifies the building. He's already dissecting the early prototypes, challenging assumptions, pushing limits. His simulator sessions aren't routine, they're relentless. Lap after lap, he's delivering precise input, brake modulation under pressure, rotational balance through chicanes, throttle response out of hairpins. He's not just adapting to the 2026 car, he's shaping it with brutal clarity. The team listens, adjusts, recalibrates. The vehicle is evolving with his fingerprints all over it. This new machine isn't just being refined to meet the rule changes. It's being sculpted around Hamilton's instincts. His uncanny ability to trail brake into slow corners, to manage rotation in tight sequences, to read grip before others even sense it, that's what this design is being tailored for. Aerodynamic specialists are already experimenting with new flow structures, revisiting concepts abandoned years ago, all because Hamilton's historical data still exposes performance potential others overlooked. This isn't nostalgia. It's unfinished business. And Lewis? He's not here to relive the past. He's here to seize the future. He's not driven by legacy, not fueled by sentiment. He's propelled by something far more dangerous, a sense of incompletion. The chapter he never got to finish still burns in his chest. He remembers every inch of that night in Abu Dhabi. The silence. The confusion. The injustice. That pain didn't fade. It hardened. And now it's weaponized. This isn't a return to prove doubters wrong. It's a declaration that he was never done in the first place. His absence wasn't a retreat. It was a recalibration. He's coming back sharper, leaner, more ruthless. This isn't about redemption. It's about reclaiming what should have never slipped through his grasp. He knows the crown is still out there. Not just as a symbol, but as a promise. Mercedes isn't simply giving him a seat. They're giving him the blueprint. His voice carries weight in every department: mechanical, aerodynamic, strategic. He isn't being accommodated, he's being prioritized. The project is no longer about catching up. It's about launching forward with a singular force leading the charge. He's not joining a rebuild. He is the foundation. The structure is being redesigned for one outcome, giving Hamilton the tools to dismantle the competition piece by piece. Inside the factory, there's no talk of pressure, only precision. No hype, just obsession. Meetings stretch late into the night. Simulation data is pored over again and again. Adjustments are made, undone, and reworked with his voice guiding every iteration. This isn't a one-way relationship. It's a symphony of minds tuned to the same frequency. Every component must serve a singular goal: domination. His bond with the Mercedes crew hasn't weakened, it's deepened. Years apart didn't create distance. They created perspective. His time away gave him clarity, hunger, and a new level of ferocity. He's seen how other teams operate. He knows what works, what doesn't, and he's bringing every lesson back to Brackley. Only now, he's older, wiser, and twice as dangerous. Other drivers? They feel it coming. They see the glint in his eye during interviews. They hear the murmurs from inside the paddock. They sense the shift in the air. It's not just that Hamilton is coming back, it's how he's coming back. Not as an icon resting on reputation, but as a juggernaut fueled by precision and purpose. He's not looking for a fair fight. He's preparing to dismantle every challenger with a cold, calculated fury. The sport isn't ready. The fans think they've seen the best of Lewis Hamilton. They haven't. The grid believes the new generation has taken over. They're mistaken. The engineers who once built machines around his genius are doing it again, only this time, the urgency is even greater. The timeline is shorter. The margin for error is zero. And Hamilton is pushing them all harder than ever. The fire inside him hasn't faded, it's become something else entirely. Not louder, deeper, more dangerous, more focused. The world thinks they know what's coming in 2026, but they don't. Because what's returning to the grid isn't just a 7-time world champion. It's the embodiment of defiance. A living, breathing force that refuses to be forgotten. This isn't a revival. It's a storm. And it's already gathering speed.